following program is exclusively produced and distributed by Dick Dinman's Double D Productions, Inc., all rights reserved.
Hi, Golden Age film fanatics, and welcome to DVD Classics Corner on the Air. My name is Dick Dinman, and our goal is to become your exclusive guide to the very best of the Golden Age classics coming out on DVD. We'll have reviews, breaking news of upcoming releases, plenty of surprise guests, and a special feature devoted to the great Golden Age film composers, which we call Cinemusic. So let's turn on the marquee and lights, camera, action.
It's time for Dick's Picks, in which I get to shine the spotlight on one of my Dick's Picks of the week. Who will crack the case of the lipstick killer? Ask Mother, says the message scrawled in lipstick at a murder scene written by an unidentified serial killer who preys on women. So begins the wheeling, dealing, and backstabbing of the competing media hotshots as they vie to unmask the so-called lipstick killer in While the City Sleeps, which is one of two Fritz Lang directed paranoid thrillers, both starring the great Dana Andrews, which our heroes at the Warner Archive have just released in sterling fashion in the sight and sound wonder of the Blu-ray format. Among the stars supporting Andrews are Rhonda Fleming, George Sanders, Howard Duff, Thomas Mitchell, Vincent Price, and Ida Lupino. Also not to be missed is Fritz Lang's final Hollywood thriller, ironically entitled Beyond a Reasonable Doubt, in which novelist Dana Andrews is out to expose the injustices of capital punishment in a daring manner we dare not reveal here, which highlights the twists and turns that run rampant in a brilliantly layered plot ideally suited to Lang's talents. Both While the City Sleeps and Beyond a Reasonable Doubt are now available on Blu-ray, courtesy of the Warner Archive, even as we speak. Stay tuned for more Dick's Picks, coming up on DVD Classics Corner on the Air very soon. TCM Noir Alley host and Film Noir Foundation founder Eddie Muller joins me in saluting the scandalously underrated star of both While the City Sleeps and Beyond a Reasonable Doubt, Dana Andrews, in a show I'm calling A Double Dose of Dana. Eddie Muller, welcome back to DVD Classics Corner on the Air. As usual, it's wonderful to have you here. I look forward to it every single time you're kind enough to guest on my show.
Well, thank you, Dick. I appreciate that. It is always a pleasure. We never know exactly where we're going to go when we start this stuff, but it always ends up being interesting, at least to me. I hope it is.
Absolutely. You're one of our most popular guests. And today we'll be talking and devoting the entirety of this show to a star named Dana Andrews on the release, the Blu-ray release from Warner Archive of While the City Sleeps, and and Beyond a Reasonable Doubt. Sorry, I don't know why I do that, but at any rate, Dana Andrews is and always has been one of my really favorite actors. Where would you put Dana Andrews? Let's isolate him into the noir genre type of films, because he's done a reasonable amount of those, and virtually all of them have been memorable, I believe. Where would you put him in the category of a noir actor?
Oh, I would put him right at the top, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that his particular style was so well suited to what was going on in film noir, and it's the whole movement, the whole tone and ethos of noir was very suited to actors who underplayed. And I just think that Dana Andrews had this incredibly compelling way of revealing his inner turmoil in a very quiet, measured way on screen that worked so well in these types of films. So, and he also could wear a hat, as well as anybody. I think Dana Andrews and Alan Ladd were the guys who really knew how to wear a fedora.
Oh, yeah.
And he's just got the perfect face for film noir. I have to say that, and I don't really think he has gotten his due. I think the splashier actors or the more macho guys like Mitchum or Bogart or Robert Ryan or Richard Widmark, these guys tend to be emblematic of noir, but I would put Dana Andrews right there with them.
So would I. I have a feeling that in order to totally appreciate him the way you and I do, is you have to have a real, better than average knowledge of the acting craft. Because people who don't, I think, would miss what Dana Andrews is doing, because a lot of what he's doing is very internal, and it's essentially concealment of many aspects. And the one thing about acting is, if you want to conceal something, it first has to be there. Some actors try concealing no information at all, and it comes off as a total blank.
They're just a blank slate.
Yeah, blank slate.
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
And that concealment is sort of the essence of what he does, at least in his noir roles. I mean, when you think about Laura, he's struggling with his obsession with a dead woman, and he's so taciturn and tight-lipped that people see that knotted up energy that he has, and some people are turned off by it, I guess. I don't know. It's odd. See, I think one of the best performances in all of film noir is Dana Andrews in Where the Sidewalk Ends.
Oh, yeah.
Which I just think is absolutely incredible performance of, the cop with a secret in his past, and then he kills this guy, and he hides the body, and then he has to hide everything from everybody. It's just a really, really deep, conflicted performance, and he's absolutely brilliant.
He is brilliant, and my favorite moment in the film is right after he decks, I think it was Craig Stevens.
It is Craig Stevens.
Yeah, Craig Stevens. He decks him, and he finds that Craig Stevens is dead. And there's a close-up, a protracted close-up of Dana Andrews. And you can see his thoughts. You can see, I've now done something that I'll never forget and I'll always regret. My life has changed in the last 30 or 40 seconds. And you can see the gravity of that in his face. And yet, his face is physically fairly immobile.
That's like a defining noir moment. I mean, that's like what noir is all about, right?
Yeah.
And yet you don't, there isn't a lot of emoting in this. You don't see guys like Paul Muni did not make film noir, right? I mean, it was left to this new style of acting, which I think Andrews was extraordinary. And, he had a great collaborator in Otto Preminger, because Preminger clearly understood the value of Dana Andrews' underplaying and knew how to frame it all and exactly when to go to the close-up for the most impact. And it is brilliant. It is like the acting craft at its finest. So, have I convinced you that I am a big Dana Andrews fan?
Yes, and, well, the other thing you didn't mention is that the actor who worked most for Otto Preminger was, in fact, Dana Andrews. Yeah. No star ever worked more for Otto Preminger, and many preferred one time only as being entirely sufficient. A lot of his best performances are really, I think, are for Otto Preminger.
Yeah, I agree. But, you know, it's not like he just did the noir stuff, because he's also great in the Oxbow Incident, which is, you know, fantastic film. It's kind of noir, but, you know, he's different.
And the thing about Dana Andrews is his intelligence.
I hear exactly what you're saying, and yeah, I mean, he is one of the smarter actors, I think. You're right.
And he was a smart man because he, and I'm sure you know this, was trained in opera.
Mm-hmm.
And this quote, I think, is illustrative of his intelligence, and I'm quoting here. "I didn't tell Darryl Zanuck or Sam Goldwyn because you're dead in Hollywood if you're a singer. Nobody will accept you as an actor. I'm no fool. I just kept my mouth shut." So I think Andrews always had his eye on the sparrow, as they say. I think he made a concerted effort to figure out how to hold everything in and yet reveal so much, which to me is the hallmark of a truly great film actor.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. And it's interesting because not only did he do this individually and probably for the sake of his career, because as you say, he was smart, he could see which way the wind was blowing, he was creating sort of a new persona.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe once he did, you know, and Preminger fought for him to play the lead in Laura. He was not, you know, Zanuck's choice. Or
who did Zanuck want? Do you know?
John Hodiak. He wanted John Hodiak.
Yeah.
You know, no, Andrews is it's way better. You know.
Oh, sure. There's no question. No question. Andrews was also, by the way, the first idea for Lifeboat.
Interesting.
But I'm not sure how that would have played out. I think for that particular role, Hodiak may have had...
Hodiak is pretty good.
He's pretty good in it.
But it's interesting. I think that, you know, as happens with actors sometimes, I think when Laura was the hit that it was, I think Dana Andrews probably felt like, well, the public is really responding to this persona.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see how far we can go with this.
Yeah.
And while he was certainly capable of doing other things, that served him very, very well. And it's interesting because it became part of a kind of a movement in Hollywood of actors, you know, being more withdrawn and holding more in, especially in you know, in this genre, in the noir stuff. The same is also true of Dick Powell and Dennis O'Keefe,
sure.
and guys who were considered kind of lightweights. And you know, Dennis O'Keefe was just Mr. Avuncular Irishman. You know?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, when things got dark and he played that tough guy, it was the same kind of thing. He just was holding everything in.
We're going to go to a station break, and we'll be right back with Eddie Muller.
We pause now for station identification.
DVD Classics Corner on the Air is exclusively produced and released by Dick Dinman's Double D Productions, Inc. All rights reserved. By the way, I forgot to mention when we were talking about the Oxbow incident, Dana Andrews' quote about that. I don't know whether it'll surprise you or not, but I'm quoting here. "My most satisfying acting experience was in the role of Martin in the Oxbow incident. It gave me a chance to try something I'd always wondered whether I could manage, playing a character who was sensitive without making him weak."
That's a great quote, and I think
Yeah.
that speaks directly to how smart an actor he was, how smart a person he was.
Yeah.
That's you know, that's a very subtle subtle distinction.
Another film I like him in, and it's another noir, is Fallen Angel.
Yeah, which is a really complex character. A very underrated movie in my estimation.
Very
and
underrated.
I'm not going to say it's a perfect film. And it takes risks with the storyline because it asks you to buy a lot, particularly where the Alice Faye character.
Well, yeah.
But you see it a couple of times, and given the constraints of the production code at the time and what you could and couldn't say and all this kind of stuff, it's a very, very complicated story that they're trying to tell in a very streamlined way. But I just think it's terrific.
But this may surprise you about how he felt about Fallen Angel. I'm sure you probably know this, but I'll quote him. I didn't want to do it. I didn't like the character, a kind of bum ambling around the country. Mr. Preminger more or less forced me into this picture, which sort of put Alice Faye out of business. Well, not sort of. It did.
It did.
Other than radio. But apparently it's not something he enjoyed. I have to tell you, for me, obviously people think about Best Years of Our Lives, which I would imagine, well, certainly the biggest grossing picture he ever had. Obviously Harold Russell deserved his 2 Oscars for that film. But I kind of feel that Dana Andrews should have at least gotten a nomination also for it, because and William Wyler did not want him for Best Years of Our Lives.
I did not know that.
Oh yeah, he'd done 8 lines or 9 lines in The Westerner, which was his first role for William Wyler, and William Wyler was very unimpressed. And after, and he says this in one of the biographies of him, after the first day of shooting, which was one, which I think may have been the scene in the cockpit or something like that, William Wyler said, "Dana, what happened? You're a good actor."
Yeah.
To which he said, "Well, Willie, I've done 20 movies since you last saw me. I'd be an idiot if I hadn't improved." But even people as perceptive as William Wyler had a tendency to take him for granted.
It's all that quiet, reflective, internalized stuff that he was so great at, because, to me, the most memorable scene in Best Years of Our Lives is Dana Andrews with the whole, the mothball planes out in the, and that's nothing. It's just him and the planes, and it's stunning.
Well, here's what really galls me. A few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, Alec Baldwin was a guest with Robert Osborne, and they were showing Best Years of Our Lives, and they brought up that scene, and they said, "Oh my God, the photography of Greg Toland, the direction of William Wyler, the music of Hugo Friedhofer, one of the great scenes," and they never mentioned Dana at all.
And that's an actor overlooking another actor.
Exactly. It stunned me, and I was watching it with a friend, and I said, "Whoa!" I won't tell you what I said, but it's kind of
hard to believe, given that he is the focal point of the frame the entire time, and
he's alone in this mock cockpit, and he's got to do all of this with the camera on him. There is no
oddly, I think people who don't really understand acting think, well, that must be easy because there's nothing to do, and it's like, but they don't understand if you miscalculate and you make one false gesture, it's over.
I think it's one of the great acting moments on film.
It's hard for an actor to play, especially in that era. It's very hard for an actor to play so small and do things so minute when you realize that those Mitchell cameras are colossal.
Yeah.
Everybody's bearing down on you.
Yeah.
They used to have to light scenes with gigantic, leak lights and everything.
Yeah.
Now you can be small because the camera's tiny, and you don't need all the lights, and you can just do it with a skeleton crew and all this kind of stuff. But back then, to internalize and to become so withdrawn and was a challenge, and certain actors were really adept at it, and Dana Andrews was certainly one of them.
And even Kazan did not appreciate Dana Andrews in the excellent Boomerang, because he thought Dana, he's an actor, and he didn't appreciate him, and he decided to give him a long speech. Dana showed up hungover, and he decided, I'm going to give him a long speech that I wrote last night. And Dana Andrews went into his dressing room, came out an hour later. They filmed it in one take, and it was letter perfect.
Yeah.
So he had tremendous discipline, which you'd have to have, especially if you're an alcoholic. It's interesting, though, the very positive aspects we're talking about, Dana's level of concealment and the internal qualities and all of that, may be the reason why he came so close to being a big star, but just missed. Gregory Peck, Gary Cooper, these people are bigger than life. Dana Andrews was not. He was not really bigger than life. He was more a reflection of life. And maybe, what do you think? Why didn't he become, well, other than some bad breaks after 1947 and maybe his own alcohol problems, why didn't he become a bigger star? I would have preferred Dana Andrews in Gentleman's Agreement, frankly.
Yeah, I can. Well, the thing is, whatever the reason is, I think there are certain actors that appear, quote unquote, heroic. Like Gregory Peck can be heroic, and Gary Cooper is heroic. And Dana Andrews never struck me as heroic on screen or interested in being heroic. He didn't play heroic the way a lot of these other actors would do it. It was going to be small,
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was just his way. Also, another thing I think is interesting about him is even though it's fascinating that he was an opera singer, because one of the things that's noticeable about him is is his delivery of lines and his voice.
Mm-hmm.
He has kind of a monotone when he, especially in these quieter roles. He is not going to emote. He is not going to give it up like he's on a stage. He's not going to do radio voice. He understands that he's in a film. And I think he totally understood the relationship to the camera. And if the camera is this close, I don't have to sell. Mm-hmm. I don't have to sell as hard because you can read it on my face. And he's working it with his eyes. We've noted that, right? Mm-hmm. How much he does with his eyes and his parts. And it's like, I don't have to work so hard vocally if the camera is right on me.
Yeah.
And I just think that he didn't have, this is an interesting thing. I think a lot of people misread his performances because he does, I could see a guy like Kazan, right, with all the stage background and everything, thinking that Dana Andrews is like, you're not giving me enough. Or he's not really that great because he's a film actor, for God's sakes,
What's
they
interesting?
The same thing of Mitchum, right?
Yeah,
they thought the same thing about Robert Mitchum.
Oh.
Then you see what Charles Lawton does to him. It's like more. Let's go. Okay, there's no top on this.
Yeah. It's true. One of my favorite Dana Andrews performances is in a film I wish Fox would stop referring to as a film noir, and that's Daisy Kenyon. Now, it's not normally the kind of film that I like to wrap my head around, but I find that his performance in that it's potentially a very unlikable role, but there are very likable qualities in it. And I think he's absolutely brilliant in it. And the other thing I wanted to mention, and this is something Eleanor Parker told me. Eleanor Parker lived next to Dana Andrews for quite a few years, Dana Andrews' house and his wife, and was very close with his wife. And she told me many times they've been woken up in the middle of the night with Dana totally drunk, yelling to come in the house, and his wife wouldn't let him in. So I said to her, well, wait a minute. How was it working with him on Madison Avenue? And she said he was totally disciplined. She was aware that he had been drinking, but that he was line perfect, and there were absolutely no problems. So he had this apparently unusual ability to function virtually fully. It's amazing that the alcoholism, I know you think that in While the City Sleeps.
There was a lot of drinking going on.
There must have been,
Oh,
but
my
not just by him.
No, I swear. Well, now I guess we're into this movie, but there's a scene in the bar with Dana Andrews and Ida Lupino, and then I think Thomas Mitchell joins them.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine there must have been at least a quart of scotch consumed between the three of those.
They ain't drinking water.
They were not drinking water, and there are moments where I am positive that both Dana Andrews and Ida Lupino are drunk.
But it works.
The camera.
It works within the context.
They're playing newspaper men in the 1950s, right?
In a bar.
Yeah. In a bar. I was very good friends with Peggy Cummins, and she told me about him coming over to England and making Curse of the Demon with Jacques Tourneur, and she said the same thing, essentially, that Eleanor Parker was saying to you, that, he was totally professional. He was a pleasure to work with, a, complete collaborator on the set. And then after hours, they'd go to a dinner party or something, and he had a chemical dependency on booze. And by the end of the night, he would be rude and
belligerent and
belligerent, and it was like, Dana, you have to leave. It's time for you to go home. And then he'd show up for work the next day and apologize and say, I'm very sorry. And he was a complete professional. But it was just every day would become like that.
Eddie, I know your schedule is a little crazy, and I really appreciate your spending so much time with us. For me, it's just a joy. We seem to be in sync on almost everything, except certain leading ladies. But
I'm happy to say that we have had our disagreements over the years.
Yes.
That keeps us honest, I think.
Yes, it does. And Eddie, thank you so much, and I can't wait till next time.
Oh, always a pleasure, Dick. Really, I enjoy it very much, and just whenever it can work out time-wise, I'm happy to do it.
Wonderful. Well, that's my show for today. DVD Classics Corner on the Air is conceived, written, produced, and directed by me, Double D. And if you'd like to hear some of my older vintage shows, please go to www.dvdclassicscorner.net, where in addition to the broadcasts, you'll find hundreds of my print reviews of classic DVD releases. So, until next week,
keep well, keep happy, and keep listening.